Hello again, my name is Emily Zayden. I'm the director of the Craft in America Center here in LA. We are thrilled to be presenting this lecture by Harriete Berman this morning. Harriette's joining us from San Mateo, California. Harriette's one of the artists in one of the most recent Craft in America episodes, Jewelry. The other episode that recently aired is called Harmony. Once again, our episodes are all viewable on our website, craftinamerica.org, also on our PBS channel and on PBS, and also on our YouTube channel. We have all sorts of additional video materials, shorts, clips of Harriete and of all the artists in the episode and in our past episodes on our website. We currently have the Jewelry and Harmony exhibitions on view in our center here in LA. We invite you all to join us. We are open by appointment currently. Contact us and let us know if you are able to visit. And the exhibition is up into March. For today, Harriette's going to be covering 3 key aspects that have been focal concerns throughout her career. Harriete, thank you so much for giving this talk today. I'm going to pass it over to you because there's so much ground to cover. We are thrilled to have you and to get this overview of your 40+ year career. You are at the forefront of your field, and it will be thrilling to hear what you're going to be discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining. Today's lecture is titled Crafting, Value, and Identity. These 3 words are a way to organize and share with you a glimpse into 40 years of my work. I want to thank Craft in America for hosting this lecturette by Harriete, but even bigger, the opportunity to be part of the jewelry video production by Craft in America. In April 2021, in the midst of the pandemic, Carol Savion called from Craft in America asking if I would be filmed for their upcoming program about jewelry. I couldn't believe it. It gives me chills to think about it now. I, like everyone else, had been staying home and working in the studio for the past 14 months, isolated from the world. For 14 months, no one had visited my studio. It was total chaos. My studio assistant had retired with COVID. There was no reason to clean or organize the chaos. The floor of my studio only had lily pads of empty space to walk on. Clutter had exploded with entropy. Usually, a visiting artist or a collecting group would be reason enough to clean my studio. But during COVID, this was not going to happen. I was accustomed to working in chaos, but now, with this phone call, I had to finish current work and clean the studio. The Craft in America crew was coming, and I only had 3 weeks to clean and organize. Everything in the studio oozed into the driveway for massive amounts of organization. Not only did I have to clean the floor so it was safe for people to walk on, but I had to imagine how vast quantities of my materials, like this collection of post-consumer plastic waste, could be an amazing backdrop for a video shoot. And right here, right now, I want to thank great friends like Jen and Emiko Oy for investing days after days for cleaning up the COVID chaos. Saturday in the beginning of June arrived, along with a 6-person video crew. The aisles were clear, and I felt for sure they were going to be disappointed that they had so little space to move around, but I knew I had done my best. While Kobe Atlas, that's who you see in the front of this image, and she was the director, and I walked around the studio to assess the lay of the land, the video crew was unpacking 2 vans of equipment and 6 people. Imagine this, the sound and the focus were all Bluetooth, and it took some time to activate. Before lunch, they had set the goal of taping fabrication shots for an hour or so. In this video, you can see me at my bench with the director of photography. He's in the foreground with his camera squeezed to one side of the studio. If you can imagine, Sid, the DP, was the larger than life Zeus god of photography. He played this role with calm demeanor. Kobe was a very small person and too short to look over the cabinet, so all she could see was the camera monitor, and standing behind her is the gaffer. He was the go-to man for every piece of tape cloth or video accessory. At the end of this conga line in my studio was the focus puller. And you can see the top of his head and his own monitor where he focused all his attention. On the very far side of my studio, down the narrow aisle of tools and materials, was the sound guy holding the boom with the microphone. Denise Kang, the producer, was always somewhere in the background. There is a huge difference between crafting time and video time. This image right here that you're looking at is a screen grab from the video. I am scribing the line for cutting out the wrist hole for a bracelet. That only took me a couple of seconds, and they had me do it twice just to make sure they got the video footage. In this image, you can see the outside of the bracelet, upper left-hand corner, the template at the bottom, and the tin cut out for the wrist hole. It takes about 5 minutes, we'll say, to pierce out the wrist hole, which is nothing in crafting time, but it was an eternity in video time. Bill, that's my husband, who was watching this whole scenario, told me later that the DP, the director of photography, was going, cut, quietly, with motions to the rest of the video crew. They only needed a few seconds in video time of me sawing out this wrist hole. And he was giving me little subtle hints like, Harriet, what are you doing next? 4 months later, I finished this bracelet for the Craft in America exhibition in LA, and I hope you get to see it in person. I try to make every single bracelet completely different. This bracelet started during the video shoot is called Feeling Like a Star. Most of my work is autobiographical to some extent, and when I started this bracelet with a camera pointing at me, I really felt like a Craft in America star. Notice the stars along the outside of the bracelet and the teapot constellation on the side. Here's another view of the other side of the bracelet, and it has multiple layers of the wrist hole elevated, and there's no other bracelet like it. And it has all the star motif layers of the tin cans. For the video shoot, I started 2 bracelets because I knew that the multiple steps in every bracelet would take too long. Here I am using my belt sander to stand the edge of the tin can. In this image, you can see the two views of the bracelet. Now, I had purchased, which I don't normally do, 2 tin cans identical on eBay because I wanted to make sure that I had enough like step by step for the video shoot. So here you are, you're seeing 2 steps. And this is another screen grab from the video. And if you can imagine, I'm cutting the tin cans, which are actually steel, with pinking shears that are designed for fabric. So if it looks difficult in the video, that's because it is. In this photo, you can see the inside of the wrist cut from tin cans, and then my practice strips that I use for the pinking shears. And I hope you watch the video, the jewelry video again, so you can see me soldering this wrist hole. Here's the paper pattern for the bracelet, and you can see the wrist in tin cans. Now this is another screen grab from the video, and I am riveting a tiny 10-karat gold rivet. It was kind of nerve-wracking to be doing these teeny tiny rivets out of 10-karat gold while 6 people are watching me at my craft. In crafting time, it took about 10 minutes to make those 2 rivets. But the reality was that I had about 80 more to go. This is the inside of the bracelet with the tiny rivet showing, but if you can't see it, look at the yellow arrow and it's pointed to the tiny gold rivet. Here's the bracelet done and a quick photo I took before I took the bracelet to LA at Craft in America. I hope you get to see the exhibition at Craft in America. I also made a 3rd bracelet, which is there, and this one is titled Craft at the Movies. I just felt like I had to express all the experiences that I had being in the jewelry video in my work. Crafting. That's one of our topics in crafting value and identity. And there's a lot of ways that we can look at this word. What does crafting mean to you? This is my studio. It's my sanctuary. It's not easy, but it is where I belong. I have a background in metalsmithing. I had the benefit of an undergraduate degree in metalsmithing from Syracuse University and a master's degree from Tyler School of Art, also in metalsmithing. But that was only the beginning of my education. I have a very traditional jewelry and metalsmithing skills. I also have years of experience doing jewelry repair, and I do silver repairs for more than 30 plus years. I take the traditional skills that I have and apply them to unorthodox materials. The term craft has a lot of meanings. What does crafting mean in a culture when almost everything we own is manufactured? The term craft is often used in the film and video industry And if you listen to any actor or director talking about a film, they will always use the term craft, and they rightly consider craft synonymous with skill. But in the art and craft world that I know, craft is often viewed as second class. And I think that would be an amazing topic to discuss at length. But we'll move back to crafting, value, and identity in my work. I use my extensive metalsmithing and crafting skills for my jewelry, Judaica, and sculpture. I take my crafting skills and I turn this around using unexpected materials and themes. From 1980 to 1988, I was crafting, making by hand what looked like manufactured appliances. This is eating out of the refrigerator. It's from the family of appliances you can believe in. It has a table that extends with a fork, knife, and spoon, TV freezer without a trace of frost, and a built-in telephone. Here is a crock pot. It says right there on the front, consume, consummate, consumed. Marry me for my Hobart has a 14-karat gold ring through the nose. Now, I actually knew somebody who married his wife for her Hobart, and a Hobart is what they called it back then, but now most commonly referred to as a kitchen aid. My work was meaningful, not just because of the autobiographical content or the social commentary about women's roles in our society, but also because I crafted what looked like manufactured objects by hand. In 1988, I made an abrupt change, a big change in my work. At that time, there was no curbside recycling and there was no conversation in the news about recycling at all. But I decided that I was going to work with recycled or just post-consumer trash. At that time, every single thing in your household was thrown away as trash. And I know that's hard to believe now, but that's the way it was. There was no curbside recycling. By working with recycled materials, I was taking packaging that normally would have been thrown away, really and truly thrown away, taking materials from the waste stream of our society. These are just a few of the tin cans in my studio. And when I first started working with tin cans, it was really embarrassing. But at that time, I could not stand the idea of making one more thing to add to the excessive waste of our society. By reusing these materials and examining closely, I had to add new meaning. The materials were repurposed and diverted from the landfill. They were given a new life. I am honoring the role of craft and applying my crafting skills to jewelry, Judaica, and sculpture. Now, I just put this slide in here to remind you that you can have any chance to ask your question by submitting them in the chat room, and we can discuss those issues at the end of the lecture. But I really would like this to be interactive and hear what your questions are and what you have to say. I'm going to move on with the next lecturette by Harriete. With crafting, value, and identity, we've discussed crafting. Now we're going to move on to value. And first, we're going to talk about the value of materials. Now, we all are very familiar with the idea of value of materials, as in this Fabergé egg, that's gold and gemstones and enamel and precious materials. But I'd like to think about the values of the materials in some other way, completely different. In 1988, there was this huge change in my life. I was the artist leading a double life. I was now both a mother and an artist. That was the beginning of seeing my materials in a new way. And here are some tin cans in my studio. I'm going to talk about that Quilts creamed cottage cheese in the upper left-hand corner, because I was going to see the value of the materials in a whole new way. I wanted to work with recycled tin cans, but I started first with the steel doll houses. The steel doll houses also had the meaning in the material and the symbolism of the domestic life. You can see the inside of a house right here. And this amazing photo of the domestic sphere, which was a dialogue for the family of appliances you can believe in. But the tin cans aren't perfect, just like domestic life. It's always a little bit kinked and challenging. So the value of the materials for my work also comes with a message. Here's one of the early pieces. It's from the pedestal a woman can stand on. And the entire pedestal used a quilt pattern that I was making with recycled, those repurposed steel doll houses. And the quilt patterns were the traditional outlet for women. This is titled Patchwork Quilt, Small Pieces of Time. In this next piece, you can see the quilt patterns on the sides. The window frame itself was constructed from the roofs of the doll houses. And you'll see the curtain, which looks soft and ruffled, but it's really tin cans. The quilt pattern that I used was broken dishes. The title of the piece came from this ad. My American kitchen saves me 2 hours a day to keep myself looking young. So we're back to the tin cans. Notice the cottage cheese container at the top. You'll see in the cottage cheese container where she's pushing the baby carriage, all dressed up in her nice dress with high heels. Those are the messages of the society at that time. But there also are other ways that we see the messages. In the video, you saw me holding this can of a liquid wax. And on the can, it actually says, luster, long lasting, stays clear. And she's wearing her fancy dress with the bow and the high heels. This is the messages of the consumer society at the time of the perfect housewife. But here are some newer materials that you may remember. This is the time of the internet in which the AOL tins were sent to every household with a tin, top and bottom, and a CD, unsolicited trash. The messages on these cans say something completely different. Hours free. Now, no credit card required. Try it today. with no commitment. These days, people get married with no commitment. So it's interesting that it's on a tin can. Here's a group of bracelets, and what I want you to think about when you look at my jewelry is the messages in the material. Here's another example of my jewelry. It's a Silicon Valley fruit crate that was designed to be a display for 3 bracelets. The bracelets themselves are constructed from vintage computer boards. Just amazing. Silicon Valley exports now much more than fruits and vegetables. It exports ideas and innovations. And here you can see these amazing bracelets made from vintage computer boards. They no longer look like this. You can see on the right the computer board with the leaves applied and the plums, like you're having this contrast of exporting fruit and the idea of the exporting the computer industry that we have today. And in the left image, you can see the bracelet that has printed tin can of beads, but it also has transistors on the bracelet. Now, those transistors don't even exist in computer boards like that, but it's a really interesting contrast. So we've talked about the value of materials, the value of messages, and now we're going to talk about the value of brands. Now, we all recognize that this is Chanel, or the value of the Tiffany brand, where the color of the blue Tiffany box is actually part of their brand identity. And we know the value of the Apple and Apple iPod in our consumer society. We recognize these brand names. Well, here's a bracelet that I made, 2 bracelets actually. It was made out of a tin can that held a premium product, champagne. And every bracelet that I make is different. Here's another example from the California collection. This is a display inspired, the fruit crate label is inspired by the Golden Girl fruit crate label. You can see it right there on the front. It has 3 bracelets that are innovations of California: Barbie, Jazzercise, and Mrs. Fields. So we've discussed the value of the materials, of the messages, and the brands. Here's an example, another screen grab from the video, and we saw prestige, value, and identity bracelets in the video. Here's the prestige bracelet in the very front. It says prestige on the side of the bracelet. On the top of the bracelet is a premium brand for liqueur. The bracelet top left has gemstones on the outside of the bracelet. Prestige, value bracelet. And we also have the brand names. And the outside of the bracelet is covered with gemstones. Again, a commentary about our usual perception of jewelry made of precious metals and gemstones, and the brand name products on all of these bracelets. Look at the inside of the bracelet, and you will see that it has UPC codes. This is the identity bracelet, but it also refers to the fact that UPC codes are on all our packaging. We create an identity for ourselves by what we buy and why we buy it. And there you can see the inside of the bracelet with the UPC codes. Prestige, value, and identity. But prestige, value, and identity also talk about the roles of jewelry. So it's a really interesting combination there, something to think about. Value of materials, messages, and brands. Again, I want to remind you to submit your questions to Emily through the chat box, and we're going to go on to our next lecturette. Crafting, value, and identity are the three topics for this lecture, and we're going to focus on identity. In the previous images, we saw the identity bracelet as an example of how the bracelets talk about the identity of the wearer. But there's also the identity of the artist. And here I am, ever ready working woman, and there is the appliance, ever ready working woman. Looking at this appliance, we're going to look at the side where it says, ever ready working woman. This is very autobiographical. Look through the yellow plastic window. It has a spark gun, which you can produce sparks really and truly with the trigger at the bottom. It has an eyeshadow compartment in the top of the appliance. And a lipstick cartridge that fits up inside of the handle. We'll look at each component separately and its role for the ever ready working woman. There's the real drill chuck in the front, the tools of the studio. The optional beaters, which you can use for your domestic role. The eyeshadow compartment and the lipstick are for beauty and adornment. And we also have the Wonder Woman electric cord lariat with a suction cup on the end. I am the ever ready working woman. Here's another image that talks about the identity of the artist, domestic irons. Now, a lot of my work in the past was about the domestic role of women. So I decided that my hallmark was going to be a domestic iron. It has a cord with a plug and 2 prongs. Now, this is a pun a little bit because the hallmarking or maker's mark stamps are made from iron. And look at the bottom, you can see the domestic iron, and it has a cord with a plug and 2 prongs. It is my maker's mark to identify my work, aligning myself with the traditional crafting and hallmarks of metalwork. Now you think of hallmarks is on the bottom, but there's also the maker's mark, which is supposed to be the mark of the maker. So my maker's mark is the domestic iron, a tribute to the women's roles of society and the domestic role. Here is the iron stamped on the back of a pin or on the back of this fabulous brooch, which is Candyland, and it's at Craft in America if you want to see it. And you can see my hallmark stamp on the back, my maker's mark stamp on the back of the pin. I've also made 2 domestic irons. It's part of the family of appliances you can believe in, and you'll get to see that autobiographical role. As the iron opens, I slide into place, standing at the ironing board with a hammer in my hand. There's a long story that goes with it, but I'll skip it for now. And I'm showing you photos of myself that I took for that iconic image in the iron. I'm wearing a grid pattern dress because I was making fun of minimalist artwork at the time, which was the domain of men and the male dominated artwork. And I had the hammer in my hand because my graduate school professor at the time thought I was hammering as if I was ironing. Here's another example of the identity of the artist. Look in the center. It says Mermaid, and you'll see those two handcuffs with a sterling silver charm bracelet in the center. Now, Mermaid is like a secondary identity for myself because Berman, which is my last name, is not a very good name for an avowed feminist. So I identify a lot of my work as Mermaid, M-A-I-D, as a young woman, or a pun on made by hand. And we're going to look more closely at the bracelet, and you'll see that it has a small sterling silver charm that is my maker's mark cut out, and it's part of the bracelet. Right there, you can see it. So Mermaid is an identity that I use on my work. Here is a chair. It's a sculpture. It is a life-size chair, but you can't sit on it. On the back of the chair, it actually says Mermaid. And if we look more closely at the chair, you can see right where that arrow is pointing that I have stamped my maker's mark. I identify all my work with my maker's mark, and I think that's really important, and it's a tribute to my traditional metalsmithing skills. Here is another chair where it's also identified as Mermaid as my signature. And there is the vanity seat. So we're having another image of the lecturettes by Harriete. And that image of me, I dressed up as a 1950s housewife. And I'm holding one of the refrigerators. Eating out of the refrigerator is a Harriete Berman refrigerator. So the identity of the artist is this full life-size photo as the appliance lady. Now you saw the refrigerator a little earlier. And the refrigerator opens up and you can see it inside. I originally made that piece because I thought you could tell so much about people's lives just by opening their refrigerator. Another way that I talk about identity in my work is with the UPC codes. This is a necklace from the Identity Bead series, and you can see that each bead has a UPC code on one side, and the black and white lines of the penguin caffeinated mints. And again, thinking about what I said earlier, we create identity for ourselves in our consumer society by what we buy and why we buy it. Here are 4 bracelets from the Identity Bracelet series, and you can see how I use the UPC codes and black and white lines as a motif. And one of my favorite bracelets where you can see the UPC code and brand names. So, crafting, value, and identity. And we have more or less concluded the formal part of my presentation, and I hope we have some questions for the audience.
We do have a few, and thank you so much, Harriete, for covering so much ground. To begin, well, we do have a couple questions coming in from the audience. We did receive prior some questions as well. Let's start, and I invite everyone to please either raise your hand if you would like to be on camera so Harriete can see you. We can have you pose questions that way, or type them into the chat or the Q&A. So the first question that came in was from R. Thomas about a technical question about how you avoid burning colors off when soldering tin.
Well, if you watch the video, you'll actually see me soldering the bracelet center for one of the bracelets I was making with the video crew. And I actually solder it. And it was like a 2-second thing. And then I laughed because the fact is you have it. And I said something like, that was really fast, but takes years of experience. So in other words, that 2 seconds of soldering amounts to about 30 years of practice. Yeah, heat ruins the paint finish, and talking about the finish of the tin cans, I never paint them. So if I damage the images or patterns on the tin cans, I have to live with it. So I've learned to be extremely careful. And that I also feel like that extra care that I take in fabricating my work, because I've worked with the tin cans, actually goes into the silver repair I do and that type of thing, because I've learned that working more carefully actually saves me a lot of time.
Great. Let's pop over to the Instagram question prior.
Yes. A lot more than just hand exercises. I think we're on the wrong screen there. Right, there we go. I am actually a certified fitness instructor. Now, I grew up with this idea that artists don't have to exercise, but soon after having 2 children, I came to the realization that it was either up or down. So I believe in a lot more than hand exercises. During COVID pandemic, I've led an outdoor exercise class 5 or 6 days a week. So I encourage everybody to not only exercise to be strong and powerful, but I also want to make another recommendation, and that is to avoid repetitive tasks. So here you see me cutting the black plastic, which you also saw in the video. And when I'm doing a task, normally I avoid doing the same thing for more than a few hours, because I feel like that's really hard to sustain for your body. So I would recommend that if I was cutting plastic, that I might be doing something else like drilling it or some other task that needs to be done. And moving on to the next slide. Right. So when I made this entire necklace, I would only cut plastic for a couple hours a day, even though it was a marathon effort that took 4 months to make this. I do think it's really important as a maker to protect your body. So I do think it's important to exercise and be fit and strong for endurance as well, because there are times, I understand, and that you need the endurance of being physically fit and strong. The day before I was taking my work down to Craft in America in LA, 10 bags of black plastic trash came from the recycling center. And I had no studio help that day. And I had to empty all these bags, sort through the volume of black plastic, throwing out the parts that were too disgusting or broken to use, and wash this entire quantity of black plastic, sort it, wash and dry it. And some of it was really disgusting because it came from the recycling center, and prepare it. And so therefore that 7.5 hours of work was going into the window at Craft in America, where they are so graciously allowing me to fill their window with black plastic trash, so we can talk about the impact of plastic on our environment. So in summary, I think it's really important to exercise for health and fitness. I want you to exercise for strength and endurance and avoid extended and repetitive motions.
I just want to add that for anyone who is in LA, we do invite you to bring us your black plastic, and we will be adding to that collection in the window. And if you want to talk about that, your concept for the window, Harriet.
Oh yeah, well, can we go back to the window image? Yes. This was a smaller black plastic necklace I made, and Crafting America got a mannequin, and it is wearing a bracelet and the necklace made from black plastic consumer waste. The reality is, first, that no plastic is recycled unless it's clean. This is why a few years back, China, which was actually a major way for us to dispose of our plastic waste. China decided it wouldn't take our plastic waste because it was too dirty. If plastic is dirty, it can't be recycled. That's one thing. Black plastic can't be recycled at all, except for the rarest of recycling centers. And that's because of the black plastic color. The optical scanners used to sort plastic at the recycling center can't see the black plastic. And black plastic is actually usually two different numbers. And so the ability to recycle or repurpose the black plastic is close to impossible. And I'm sure that you've also heard about the impact of plastic in our oceans. Now, it's not so, there's a lot of issues that are going around right now about plastic in our society because we have all these single-use plastic containers of every size you can and sort you can imagine. And if you just try to have one day without plastic use, I think you would find it close to impossible. So it's a big, gigantic environmental issue about the plastic in our environment and how it's washing into our oceans. When I was doing the project of the 26-foot long black plastic gyre necklace, and I hope you go to my website and look at the information and the images there, I was saying to myself, how does the plastic get in the oceans? How does it get in our environment? I don't understand it, because most of us think that we're being like completely responsible by putting our plastic in the trash can or the recycling can. But the reality is that I was walking on the street to the gym every day. This is pre-pandemic. And I realized that there was plastic trash on the sidewalk every single day. And when I go for walks now, during COVID, that was one of our major activities. I always carry a bag with me and I collect the plastic trash that I see in the woods and on the sidewalks. But there's plastic everywhere. And then the plastic on the sidewalk gets washed into the sewer, and then it gets into the stream, and then it gets into the bay, and then it gets into the ocean. It's a huge problem.
Question as far as working with tin, because you mentioned that really was partially what initiated your interest originally. What was the status recycling wise for tin? What is even now?
Well, when I first started, it was thrown away because there were no recycling programs. When I first started recycling, which was in 1980, I would collect my newspapers and I would take them like in bags or piles, and I'd have to take them to Stanford University, where we lived nearby, and put it in their bins, because this university, being a large campus with a lot of people, did have a recycling program. You had to gather up your jars in bags and take it to their recycling bin or tin. If I had magazines, what I learned to do is to take my magazines back to the magazine publisher. Because what the magazine publishers did at the time was that they would collect the unused or unsold, I'll say, magazines and send them back to the publisher. And so for that reason alone, they would that was the only way you could recycle because everything was going in the trash. Now, tin cans are recyclable, and you're seeing lots of them right here on this video right now. There's still products that are made in tin cans, like olive oil. So I buy my olive oil in a gigantic can so I can get another tin can. Or in a previous slide, you saw game tins, which makes it a premium product. Or there's a product like oatmeal. At the grocery store, you'll see some small, like premium chocolates or gum that might be in a tin can. And here's another example of a tin can, which was from a Crate and Barrel holiday catalog, where they make tin cans for products as gift items. So the tin can is used to make a product, a premium product, and create a better brand name. And this is just a fraction of the tin cans that I have in my studio.
Yeah, well, it seems like maybe we're starting to see a shift more towards metal containers versus plastic, at least in kind of the high-end natural food alternative stores.
Well, at least the tin can, if you weren't going to use it for some other purpose, could actually be sent back and made into another tin can. And here's an example of a Seder plate in which I made it with the Trivial Pursuit tin cans. And I loved how the metallic blue changed color on the Seder plate.
Amazing. Wow. I have a question. There might be another one in here. Well, there's a question about your teaching and classes.
I did teach for a while when my children were very young at California College of the Arts. It was called California College of the Arts and Crafts at that time. But you know what? This is reality speaking. It doesn't pay. I would put so much time and energy into teaching, and the salary for what was essentially an adjunct professor was so poor that by the time I paid for my babysitter and the slides that I had made, this is slide time, I had no money left, and I decided not to do it anymore. And I don't teach workshops. That's a really touchy subject these days, but I feel like the craft community as a whole has fostered this idea of, in the crafting community, that people should learn how to make a step-by-step project from people. In other words, instead of investing in improving your skill set, they want to learn a step-by-step tutorial of how to make a version of the artist. And I won't participate in that. So I don't do any teaching now.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about any historical precedents that inspire the bracelets in particular. I was wondering about, but
okay, well, because I do the silver repair, I have and I love studying antiques and all. I have an extensive knowledge of like traditional metal work, both jewelry and hollowware. And I made several teapots actually that were teapots, coffee pots, and chocolate pots. You can see them on my website that were based on historical pieces. I didn't put any of those images in here now. But so I very often refer in my work to traditional models or designs. And if you look on my website, you'll see, I really want you to see that there's a lot of resources on my website. And many of the pieces actually have a whole page dedicated to fabrication shots, so you can see more, and I provide a lot of information. I can't think of any jewelry that I made that actually refers to historical jewelry pieces though.
Okay, yeah. Well, even just the structure your structure is so distinct with the riveting and applying.
Oh yeah, tying back to the previous question, I do largely mostly cold connections. That's a metalsmithing term, but cold connections would be rivets and screws. Now you saw me in the video riveting, and I make all kinds of rivets. It's a really great way to put things together. It refers to very traditional fabrication skill for metalwork, and screws. I use a lot of screws, which you probably won't see on my jewelry, but they're definitely used on the more sculptural pieces.
Great. Question from Linda Ross. Do your ideas and concepts come before you create pieces, or do the tins stimulate the ideas for the concepts?
Oh, okay. I would say it's both. There are sometimes I get a fabulous tin can that'll inspire a bracelet. Most definitely. Such when we saw the prestige, value, and identity, and those bracelets that were featured, and I put them out specifically when the video crew came because I really felt that prestige, value, and identity were a conversation about the role of jewelry. Excellent. And they had the gemstones on it. So when I had these tin cans printed with gemstones, I thought that was a perfect thing to make a bracelet, a piece of jewelry, because it talks about the value of jewelry and how we associate jewelry as being only made from gold and gemstones. And it was astonishing video editing by the Crafting America team when they put Tom Herman in the beginning of the jewelry video, where he expounds on the fact that he makes his jewelry from gold and gemstones and the enamel, and he was feeling obviously excited by he called it a crystal. And this is the way most people think of jewelry, and they identify jewelry too, thinking about the role of jewelry as a way of identifying people, like in an engagement ring, where an engagement ring identifies a person as, you know, to be married, or a wedding band that they are married. So jewelry has many roles. And going back to the question, these bracelets right here that you're looking at, the tin can inspired this set where I was thinking about the role of jewelry, prestige, value, and identity. But sometimes there are pieces that I have to struggle with mightily, and somehow I make work. One would think that working with found objects would be easy, and that the ideas sometimes come from the materials, but I don't think that that's always true. I would like to show the modern plagues. Can we go to like slide 300? Let's see if,
in the meantime,
yeah.
while Joan gets you there, you juxtapose this really light, thin material, tin, but you give your bracelets a really heavy core. What is that material, and what are you saying to the wearer? And your pieces are heavy to wear.
Well, I wear my bracelets all the time, and it doesn't bother me.
Well,
I'll wear the biggest gigantic bracelet. You know, I think the idea of, I think the idea of wearability is very narrowly defined, and it depends on what people are thinking about. So let's say high heels. Everybody, if you go to a store and there's high heels, it might even be the predominant pair of shoes that women are wearing, but I don't consider high heels wearable any longer. Whereas, and let's see another example. What's wearable? Maybe my bracelets aren't wearable to go to the grocery store or to exercise in the gym, but I think it's pretty wearable to wear them for an opening or to go out to dinner, and then you take your bracelet off and you put it right there on the table and you eat your food, and then you move on to your next activity. And so therefore, this bracelet that might be really extraordinary and not so easy to wear might be like wearing a crown or tiara. Again, it's identifying you in some other role, like I want to be seen in some other way. So it's not necessarily something that's easy to wear, but I want people, if people decide to wear them, it's a statement, it's an experience that they are choosing to wear that bracelet because they want to say something about themselves too, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to look at the 10 modern plagues, and this is an ongoing new series of work because it answered one of the questions about the use of the tin cans. And in here, this is the 10 modern plagues are based on the biblical plagues. The first biblical plague was blood in the water. And here is my modern plague, which is providing clean and affordable water. We have a world that could most likely the ability to provide clean, affordable water for the entire world's population, but we don't. And what I wanted to point out by looking at this piece is how I used the tin cans, and yet the origin of the tin can is unimportant for the meaning of the work. And so therefore, in contrast to the bracelets, where the images on the tin can were really important, in this case, the images on the tin cans are only a vehicle like paint to produce this piece. You can see where it's written on the side. Here's another one of the 10 modern plagues. Blight was one of the modern biblical plagues, and this is the modern plague, and it's about world hunger. Again, our world has the ability to produce food to feed our entire population, and yet right here in the United States, we have people that don't have enough food. This is an image from the studio where I'm trying to figure out how to make what looks like grass out of tin can. So I went outside and cut a whole bunch of grass and brought it in, and then I was making grass out of tin cans. And here's a shot of blight, world hunger in progress. So I tried to make the Hebrew letters correspond as a sculptural image to the theme of the piece. One of the biblical plagues I'm thinking about, the modern plague is invasive species. And here is a Hebrew letter, and I made lettering, as you're seeing right there, that was covered with eucalyptus leaves, and I made all of the leaves from tin cans, and they hang off the letter very lightly as if they were real leaves on a tree. An invasive species, the biblical plague is frogs. And that's because frogs are often an indicator of the health of the environment. And invasive species are a plague throughout the world, but my invasive species for this word are only invasive species of California, and this one of them is eucalyptus. So here you're seeing one letter. And there's some real eucalyptus leaves from my backyard. I have finished a second letter. The word invasive, the word frogs in Hebrew is 5 letters, and in English it's 5 letters. So I'm doing each letter differently. And this is one of the letters for frogs, and it is mussels. These are called zebra mussels. And I actually created each mussel out of tin cans. You saw actually, I used penguin caffeinated mints again for the black and white stripes, and zebra mussels. Again, this is kind of like a abstraction. Real zebra mussels are much smaller than the ones I made, but you have to have some kind of visual quality impact here. Each one of these mussels were made by me and my studio assistant to look like a real zebra mussel. Here's another of the 10 modern plagues, and it's in progress. It's not finished. The biblical plague is hail. The modern plague is climate change. It's still in progress. I want to add more to it. So that's one of my goals for this year. There are 10 biblical plagues and there are 10 modern plagues. This is a close-up of one of the final plagues. The final biblical plague was killing of the firstborn. And my modern plague is killing of the firstborn girls. And it made me so depressed when I was working on it. Killing of the firstborn is 10 letters. Get that. So here you see my lettering in progress out on the floor. It's a major project to get all this done. There's a excerpt on the PBS website, a small video clip. I guess it's about 3 minutes where I'm talking about some of the modern plagues. It's really depressing, and it's not just my imagination. This is an ongoing problem of killing of firstborn girls or girls in general in many societies that don't value women as part of their culture. So if the children are not killed actively, which I know for a fact is done, it's horrifying to think about this, or the children are neglected, not given enough food, or not given the vaccinations that they would normally get in their culture because they don't want to invest in the women in their society, the young girls.
How you have so many facets to your practice. How do you juggle from the Judaica jewelry sculpture and then and one of the Charles Luton Brain, I think, mentioned your professional practices, guidelines. How do you divide your time?
Well, remember you saw that piece, Ever Ready Working Woman. That really is me. I wasn't making it up. I really do like to work and do work all the time. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys sitting around. Sometimes when I'm working, I decide that I have one more pressing issue or another, and then I'll decide, like I've been working on the 10 modern plagues for about 6 years already. And occasionally I have to put it aside and work on something else, like the video for Craft in America. And then I pick it back up again. So that's working on the 10 modern plagues is my new goal. I just switch back and forth. Sometimes, like, I don't make as many bracelets anymore as I used to. I made the 3 bracelets in 2021 for Craft in America, but that is not, then I'll put that aside and I'll work on something else. So I work on things and then come back to it. And some aspects of my work fit into more than one umbrella, such as some Judaica are very sculptural, and I think of them fitting under both the Judaica category and in the sculpture category. So it's not like I work on one thing at a time. It is a little bit maybe sometimes disappointing that I can't work 24 hours a day. And Charles Luton Brain was mentioning my professional guidelines, which are on my website. They're a resource for all artists and makers in all media. I also have a blog, Ask Harriet, where I will talk about practical issues artists and makers run into that I want people to benefit from my experience, right? And that's what I try to share with the professional guidelines and with Ask Harriet. So use that as a resource if you're listening and you find out about that, or you can share it with your fellow artists and makers.
Excellent. We are about 1:10. I know there's so many more topics you wanted to cover. Do you want to address any other of the questions? Or
I can't see the question, so I'm going to let you decide.
Not from the audience, but any other additional topics that you wanted to cover from?
Well, no, I'm okay. I have a lot to
Yes,
talk about,
yes,
but I don't want to use up people's time. They can go to my website. There's a lot of resources on my website. Many of the pages dedicated to one piece also have secondary pages with information about how and images about how I fabricate the work. And the professional guidelines are on my website. It's just, you just have to spell my name, spell it correctly though. Harriete Estel Berman, one word, and you'll get to my website. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me directly through my website.
excellent. And that link is up. Thank you for everyone who's put lovely comments. We will get your comments to Harriet off of the chat after the talk is over. So thank you to everyone for attending. I also want to thank all of our funders and sponsors, the NEA, LA County, LA City, and all of the additional supporters of Craft in America, individuals. So thank you for making all this possible. And thank you to Harriet for giving us this important overview of these three aspects that really wrap together your work so nicely, and giving us a deeper view into what drives your work.
Well, thank you for being willing to do this.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you to everybody.